Hey, good evening. We are back after Philly.net and the value of Agile, where we learned all about an introduction, I think, to Agile project processes, both Scrum and Kanban, which I guess I would describe as different management styles for the Agile philosophy of figuring out what tasks need to be completed, putting them in a backlog, and then working on those tasks in priority order as determined by your product owner, who should be somebody who is pretty familiar with what's going on. So I'm Chris Gomez, and I'm here alone at the station desk tonight, but behind the camera, we have Rich Ross from Microsoft.
Hey, how's it going, Chris?
Good. So it was a good meetup. I think we don't often have a speaker do the whole 2 hours, but I think it really worked because I got the sense some folks in the audience maybe were trying to implement an Agile process at work, and others, I saw some folks furiously taking notes and trying to draw diagrams and everything because it was probably all very new to them.
Yeah. I think we had a good mix, which was awesome. I think that also led to some great questions and interaction. Not only, this is probably, I don't know, I guess the last 6 months or so at least, where we've had people actively participating in the room, getting the mic, asking questions, really engaged, and online as well. We had a couple of really great people from the Twitch stream who were asking some awesome questions.
Yeah, so thanks to the viewer on Twitch who asked a lot of great questions, and it's almost ironic that we're not on Twitch for the Aftershow, but we are here on Mixer and YouTube, and so again, thanks to everybody for joining. We're going to try and keep up with the chat here, and if you have any questions either about what we talked about tonight or what we talk about here in the after show, just let us know. So
do you have the I'm just logging in now, trying to get the after show up and running, so locally anyway. Okay, so
we've got we do have chops to you in Mixer, just sending some love, and there's still 10 attendees there.
Nice.
So it's been good, growing steadily, and definitely, even if you're not watching us live, you're watching a recording. Tell your friends that we are doing this, talking about developer topics. So I think just to point out, that between the two of us, Rich, you do work for Microsoft. I don't.
But you're an MVP.
I am a Microsoft MVP, which gets confused often. And so a Microsoft MVP is not an employee of Microsoft. They're just somebody who's given entirely too much of their free time to promoting Microsoft technologies or just teaching about them, which is something I enjoyed teaching programming anyway, coding and programming development. And so I was honored that Microsoft chose to recognize me for that for a couple years running now. I don't remember how many discs are on the award, and maybe that's a stage you get to, because you know when you're a first-year MVP or a second-year MVP. Maybe it's third or fourth now. What do you know?
And you hit the milestones, right? You hit the 5.
I don't have one of those discs.
Well, that's coming.
I think a 5. I think there's a blue disc for 5 or something. So I'm still new to it, frankly. Summit is still Global MVP Summit is a time when all the MVPs in the world are invited to Redmond, to Microsoft campus, and meet with product teams, and it's still super exciting, and I still feel a little overwhelmed when I go. So that's coming up in March. But what we talked about tonight with Agile, I have been part of some organizations and teams that have really struggled with this. And you might have noticed, Rich, some of the questions I asked were directly related to teams we had trouble getting started. We couldn't ever get that first sprint right, or sprints would finish and tasks weren't done, and our definitions of done weren't very good. We would try to fill out the backlog, or the organization would insist that we'd fill out the backlog, and then they would use that and say, okay, well, that means you're going to be done at such and such date, right? And it's, well, wow, we don't even know how fast we move yet. And I thought it was interesting that Scott pointed out that when an organization does need to deal with a deadline, he brought up that chart, and he basically said, well, you got 2 ways to look at it. How much of your backlog do you want to get done, or when do you want to ship?
All right.
So you either move up the scale this way or move this way. And that sounds wonderful, and yet a lot of times you're under pressure to, just deliver the product.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult.
Somebody's banging on the door saying, when are you going to ship, right?
Right. Well, or here's the one, right? Have you ever been in a situation where you ask a project manager or an owner, okay, well, if we're going to make that date, what don't we have to have?
Yeah.
And what's the answer usually?
Nothing.
Everything's important, right?
Exactly.
What isn't the priority? Well, everything. I've had a saying for a long time, and this is a little snarky, but it's my practical look at it, is if no one refuses to tell you what the priority, if everyone refuses to tell you what the priority order is of the things that have to get done, so my saying is that if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority.
Yeah.
And what happens is then the team decides. And I've actually found that developers and team members have different reasons why they would choose to prioritize something. Some will choose what they know they can do. Like, I know I can get those tasks done, so we'll do those.
Yep.
And then other people will say, well, let me do the hardest thing first. And if the team's not focused, or at least together on this,
right,
then you find kind of like you're moving in lurches and starts where one team member is trying to do this hard thing and they're totally stuck, and another team member is clearing simple things, but it's not really contributing to the overall goals. So if there was one thing I got out of that, you got to have a strong product owner with a good sense of what needs to be done next. And if you don't have that, you're wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah, definitely. I think the limited amount of time I've been on a project, that has been one of those. That's a product, and you're doing feature updates. You're doing those kind of stories, and you're using that agile kind of technology or process. We were kind of lucky that we had a active people from the business who were the owners of the product, because this is what this corporation, this is when I was consulting, this is what this corporation did. They had a product, and they it was a product that had been out for, I think, a good 3 or 4 years. It had gone through a number of upgrades, revisions, all those great things, but there were certain features that the business wanted included, and we did the same tools that we talked about tonight. We did a different version of the Scrum Poker, but a similar online one where we each took our best guess at what we thought it would be, and consensus, when you have a half dozen or more people on the line, you do get close to a consensus for what that number winds up being. And if you're way off kilter, and all right, well, what are you thinking? What are we not? What's your experience around this kind of a feature that we're not aware of? So it makes for a good bit of discussion for the team, and it brings the team close together, right? It's not yes, I've got my features and my tasks that I'm working on, but it's one of those things that really gets everybody working together, which is something that we've been talking about a lot when you think of DevOps, right? I mean, there's the developer side of it, and how we're trying to bridge that from the operations side, but this is just from even the business and the development team aspect of it, what it takes to do those.
Yeah, and it's I think there's definitely growing pains, because if you get burned a couple times early, and I don't mean that, even if you have a very supportive organization, but you don't get a lot done in your sprints 1 and 2, or things that you classed as, they showed those numbers, which I suppose we could probably go find, but most planning poker implementations or story point implementations, you don't say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think that we didn't really go into the reasoning behind that. I have read that the reasoning for using that something like a Fibonacci sequence, but not really.
Right.
The 1, 3, 5, or maybe it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20.
Yeah.
Is the real reasoning for that is not, it's not entirely random. It's that if you just went from 1 to 10, what's the difference between a 6 and a 7?
Yeah.
We might be able, as humans, to be able to discern the difference between a 1, a 2, and a 3, but at some point you just got to say, well, it's a lot bigger. So then 5, and then 8, and then 13, and 20. Wow, that must be. When you get to 20 or 13, you probably really have no idea.
Yeah.
But you're really admitting that you just don't know what the task even is to accomplish. And
And
so
that's almost like setting a red flag and saying, all right, we really got to talk about this, because this is just kind of off the. And there's almost a gut check in moving from the 13 to that 20 to the 40, right? It's like, all right, am I, is this really that much of a, because it's not just a doubling, in some aspects of it is doubling in size, but it just feels like to get that next hurdle, it was like, all right, am I really sure that I can defend moving up to that next level? That was always for me, it was a hurdle to say that, but.
Yeah, I would tell you, I think you got to be patient, and you really need support from your organization, because you're going to have some difficult first few sprints. I mean, how long should a sprint be? Mm-hmm. And then what does it mean? Not just what does it mean to be done, but when you deliver at the end of a sprint, should the software work? Yeah. That doesn't mean it has to be feature complete, but should it work? Should it function? And
that's your definition of done, right?
Yeah. And certainly I really liked Scott's answer, because I sort of threw that at him. What do your first sprints look like? And he said, well, maybe he didn't say this exactly, but I kind of got from him, if it's a website, maybe we can deploy the website.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is funny. That relates a lot to something we've talked about offline, which is if I'm just doing a personal project, one of the first things I like to do is I want to get it into source control and have it build.
Yeah.
And that's even hello world. Just I file a new project and get that done, because if I give it a week and then 2 and then a month, it just doesn't happen.
Right. And you're getting, oftentimes when it goes that long, you get to a point where it's like, oh no, how do I roll back? And there's nothing to roll back to except file a new project.
Yeah. So it's nice to get it up on the web. And there's this little checklist of things I kind of want to nail down, and maybe we can do on a show like this is, I want to start a new project, have it in source control, and today it's very important for let's say it's going to be web-based. Mm-hmm. It's very important for your web-based project to be TLS, HTTPS. Mm-hmm. Let's get that done on day one. I don't know how many times, okay, we'll leave that till the end, and wow, what a mistake that was.
Right, you don't realize everything that breaks after you do that, right?
Yeah.
So almost in that first dev, iteration, right? Make sure that's the default going into those things. And those are some of the, those are some of the muscle things you'd want to try and put in place. We talk about file a new project. Oh, I'm just going to try this out. But how often does that trying something out become a formal
That's what
thing,
happens.
Right?
Yeah. The trying something out, you get far enough that you say, well, I don't want to start over.
Yeah. And for me, and I've done this more in the last probably dozen or so months with projects that I created, where in the past it's been against Azure DevOps, what we used to call Visual Studio Team Services, but against now what is Azure DevOps. So go there first, create my project. I have now a foundation where everything else can reside. I may or may not create stories. I may or may not create tasks around it. That's some things, depending on the scope of it, I may need to do or not. But at least I've got a landing place for that. Yeah. And I can go there and say, okay, I created up there. I come to my local instance. I do a clone of that locally, so I have it, and then I do a file new project into that repository, that Git repo that's there. And now I've got everything I need to at least get things checked in locally, but also be able to push and then figure out wherever else we're going to deploy it to from there. But at least I've got those components in place. And that's not traditional, right? From the classic dev background, there's not many people that kind of think about doing things that way.
Right. So I did want to point out that we did our Twitch community member who was there for us at Tech Bash asked a ton of questions. You might remember the handle Skull Crusher for Life.
Yes. Oh yeah, he was awesome.
Big fan. I mean, he shows up at a lot of our Twitch streams. Made it over to the YouTube
Do we know
stream.
Skull Crusher is a he?
Well, it says the Twitch guy is now on YouTube since you mentioned this Aftershow.
There you go. All right, I guess that covers it.
But either way, but yeah, so I didn't know that. And I feel like I've seen that handle before, maybe in the ASP.NET community stand-up. I don't know for sure.
Okay.
But over on YouTube, K Van Orden. So, and then we also got a shout out from Cryoni over on Mixter. So
yeah, and Chops.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned Chops.
So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Hey Cryoni.
So you talked a little bit about why not get the project, whether it's an Azure DevOps project or maybe you're in GitHub or whatever, get that started first. When do you start filing issues? Like let's say you're in GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
Are issues the same thing as tasks or not really? Tasks are different. Issues are someone else raising a problem, or so what we're talking about. And so we also have with us joining us is Tim Farrow, who also works for Microsoft,
Yep.
but used to not, and was a Microsoft MVP like me, but now I'm outnumbered. So in any case, we were talking a little bit about how maybe instead of just us hitting file new project and then hacking away, and then you get to some point where you say, oh wow, I should get this into both source control but also continuous build and integration. Like Rich suggested, well, start with that first and then do your file new project. And so I got to thinking, a lot of us, you kind of know that first step. I'm going to need a web page, and I want it to pull something. Like, when do you start building those first tasks? You just do that right away too? You go right to either Azure Boards or whatever solution you want to use for your Trello, whatever. First thing, the simplest thing is it create the project? Is that a task?
And I think as a developer, that's always my go-to. It's file, new project.
Yeah.
But once you have Visual Studio, if that's your idea of choice, integrated in with your system, you've got those checkboxes in the bottom right corner that says, add this to source control right away, right? And I think a lot of us are just hesitant to just immediately, when we're just trying to do something or learn something, to just immediately push into a repo. We kind of want to, we uncheck that box and we're like, I want to play with this until I feel like I got what's going on, or we think, oh, maybe I might have to do this 2, 3, 4 times before I get what I'm trying to do, and then I just want to push the clean version in. So it's really just the mindset of what you have. But I think always being hooked in to source control and a pipeline to push to your own dev environment and app insights, like having that set up from the beginning adds so much value, and it makes it easier in the short term to do what you're trying to accomplish, right? There was a reason you went file new project.
Yeah.
You were trying to do something or learn something. And once you get into that, you immediately want to start using all the other things that you didn't think you would want to use right away, right? I want to use App Insights. I didn't intend to use it right away, but that'd be really helpful if I had done that right away. I want it in source control because I just want to see the changes, if nothing else, over the short haul, right? And then I want to see it auto push. I either want it to auto build my container, or I want it to auto push to some app service in some dev environment, because I really, it's nice that it works locally, but I want to see what it looks like. Once you get past that first few minutes of setup, you want a whole lot more of those things. So I do agree with, even for things you're just trying to learn or play, just hooking it into that system and pipeline, because you get all those other advantages.
Yeah, and I think once you do that for a project or two, that's one of the things where it kind of reinforces itself. Like, I had a project I was working on probably, this time last year almost, that was it was a hackathon. We were helping out with a hackathon with a local customer, and we had started to create something. I think we were working on a bot at the time. But in creating it, part of the process at the time was, let's put it in DevOps. Let's get a pipeline going so it pushes it into the website in Azure, so that as they were making feature requests and they were saying, hey, can you add this? Can your bot do this? Like, you start making it, and that check-in automatically built it. I didn't have to think about that second set of steps. Right. It just showed up, and I could focus on the other parts of the task that they were asking me to do. So.
I feel like another piece we should all do early, and I'm saying again for your benefit, is okay. So if we're going to go ahead and get this deployed to where I can go to something.com, because I'm going ahead and using, I don't know, app service or AKS, Kubernetes service or something, so it's real, it's live, it's on the web. Well, then doesn't that mean I should also get TLS working right out of the gate too? And free if possible, I hope, like with the Let's Encrypt solution. I know we got a question here, because K. Van Orden asked, you just glanced over the question I had, but how do you manage tasks and sprint expectations when a fire breaks out and you spend time fixing a new issue with production versus improving your next release? So there's probably a lot of ways to answer that, and one of them could be this: if you've if you still have that longer lead time between development to production, then that's a real thing. But you were just telling me a little bit earlier, if you're one of those organizations that's you commit and you're in production very quickly, then you've lessened that spring time. That doesn't answer the question. We got to get back to it.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as a fire broke out in production because you're closer to it.
Right.
So the fire's here.
Right,
It's right under your seat.
The scenario he's referring to, we were having a side talk earlier about something else, but it led to if you are utilizing DevOps and you're doing CI/CD and you have these auto deployments and you're making 50, 100 commits a day, and that's building 50 to 100 things, and that's pushing to production a lot more faster, you have a different set of concerns, but it also alleviates a lot of the old concerns, right? You are then much closer to that fire. You are very attached to that, and you want to find out that traceability to what caused that. But you know what? You have the entire pipeline in place now to fix it, and that's getting into something that they didn't get into tonight, but it was right at the end of the meeting when he was talking about deployment slots and rolling back. And the questions around how do you roll back with, the website part was easy, you just swapped deployment slots, but it got into the database rollbacks. And that brings it into another strategy that you should consider, right? There's more than one way to do a lot of these different things, which is roll forward, not a roll back. So consider this as an alternative and as a strategy. Well, if we get to production and there is an issue, instead of rolling back, do we have the ability to roll forward and just put out another release that fixes the problem, as opposed to turning around and rolling back the release and then waiting? And this goes into how long does it take to push things to production? What is your lead cycle, right? If you're only pushing out, if you have a big release every quarter, you have to consider that, can you do that versus the rollback, which you probably have already planned for, right? But if you're back in the if this is something you can do, right? Not everyone can do this, but if you can do this and you are pushing out 30, 40, 50 times a day, then you've got these automations in place, you've got your builds in place, you've got your tests in place, you can roll forward and you can make another bug fix and that will roll to production, and that is your first line contingency plan, right? And this is just something to consider. Again, this is not for everybody, but these are strategies that exist that these modern systems make much easier to do.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what feature is busted, right? If it's your checkout feature, that may, and your ability to debug and fix and figure out what that problem is a lot longer than, you might want to leave sitting out there in production and not being able to get any sales kind of in. So I think feature might roll into that as well. And I think the other side of this is something I think we talked about last time, or 2 weeks ago when we did this, that, if you're deploying things that quickly and you're in that kind of a mode and you've got those things, one of those things you might already have in place is things like feature settings, and being able to say that this feature is on or not, and then having that ability to basically turn the feature off until you can get back out there and fix it,
right?
Or get a fix
on the live code. You don't actually deploy anything.
Yep.
You just go change the setting. Maybe it's an environment variable. I kind of want to get back to the core of the question, because I'm going to be fair to the question and say we're still avoiding it. So I put up on my laptop. I wanted to find an image that had all of the members of the Scrum team, because tonight Scott talked about Scrum. Mm-hmm. He also talked about Kanban, but he mentioned the Scrum team, and I think this is a pretty good representation of what he talked about. This comes from Daniel Fu, who has a site, danielcoding.net. I don't know Daniel, but thank you for this blog post and this pretty good graphic. So we have a team responsible for a product, and he mentioned there was a product owner who he said really has to know the product and what the customer needs and what the requirements are. But he also mentioned that Scrum Master who's off to the lower left. Now, I think if I understood Scott correctly, the question was essentially, and I want to go read it again, make sure I have it right. It was, how do you manage the expectations of the sprint, the tasks of the sprint, when a fire breaks out? So I want to interpolate a little bit the question, right? If that fire breaks out and we've got this membership here, I've got 3 devs, a QA, well, maybe that pulls off the BA, one of the devs, and one of the QA to go rush. It would normally pull them off to go rush and fix the problem. So first of all, let's say we do that. That's going to lower what the team can do in the sprint. That's going to change what can happen in the sprint and how many tasks can be completed and how many story points can be finished, and it will affect the velocity. But I think the person who runs interference here and is the referee and basically has to bring everyone together to say, okay, what's the right thing to do for the business? That's the scrum master, right? They're going to jump in and say, hold on, before you pull these people off to go manage this production issue, we're going to now commit as a team to changes in the sprint. Mm-hmm. It's that much of an emergency. That stakeholder in the upper right, who's not on the Scrum team, and the business owner on the upper left are going to say that is more important than what you're doing. And the trick here is buy-in from the org and from the stakeholders, because too many times I think we on the Scrum team feel like, okay, well, that didn't happen, and what they want is a fantasy world where both things get done. You still finished your sprint goals and you solved the big production problem that pulled you off for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, a weekend, and then you're worthless Monday morning, so 5 days, right? And that's really hard because there's a lot of pressure on us, the people living in the Scrum team box, to do both somehow. But yet I think my answer there is that the Scrum Master and the product owner have got to reorganize the backlog. Maybe some tasks get inserted to represent the fire. And that's just for process sake, so that it's clear later why the sprint didn't go as planned. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to pull, you expected to go on development this sprint, but hold on, production issue, it's got to start yanking down, I think. That's my answer. And I don't know if that's good, bad, indifferent. It's hard. I've been a part of it. I've seen teams fail at it. I've been a part of the problem. So just because I'm sitting up here doesn't mean that I'm perfect or have succeeded. Half the reason why I asked a lot of those questions to Scott is because I've been firsthand part of the failures. And I was saying, boy, I wonder how to maybe not fail next time. Or do better, at least. So I think in the Scrum world that there's got to be a recognition that tasks or the larger sprint are going to suffer a little bit because you're going to replace what you intended to do with working on this production issue. That works for Scrum. Kanban isn't quite the same way.
No, Kanban is just a replace system. It's a focus system. There's a maximum capacity on what can be active. That middle, in Kanban, there's not active, done, and then in the middle there's active, and that's where the limit is, right? You say we can only have so many active items. Here's the cap, here's the people, here's what we think can be active, right? And so, but then if you want to move in a production issue to active, something has to come out. That's usually how the rules are set up for that. I think that's what Scott was saying earlier on how that was managed.
Yeah, and you know what I find interesting is that even when I was doing Scrum training for a particular organization, I was hoping to find that graphic that I just saw up there instead of the boring scroll that you're seeing on the screen. Is that even when that was said at Scrum training, there's a lot of skepticism in the room, or flat out cynicism, like, yeah, right, like that, that's not how it's going to work, or we're still going to be expected to finish our work. And some of that goes back to, I think the org's got to buy in. Your organization as a whole has got to say, yeah, development isn't this isn't a linear world of, I give you something to do, this packet of work, and you say to me, I think it's going to be done in July. Well, what is the likelihood that you're right on the money? Tonight when he showed that graph, and it's kind of too bad that I don't have the slides, when he showed ranges on the chart of where you would optimistic, pessimistic, that reminded me of something that Uncle Bob used to say, Bob Martin used to say about, in Scrum it's important to be accurate over precision. So it's not that I'm going to be done Friday, it's that I'm going to be done sometime this week. You be right about that, be accurate that it's going to be done this week, but that level of precision is not useful. like Friday. How do you know you're gonna be done Friday? Maybe it'll be Thursday. Maybe it'll be Monday. Maybe it'll be next Tuesday. But will you be done within a week? And I thought that represented that. How he said, you know, this if you go along the scale and decide that it's important to ship in a time frame, then this is the set of possible stories that will be done. If it's more important that you finish this amount of stories, then this is the set time frame in which you will be done. Yep. And that time frame wasn't a day, it was still a range. So be accurate even if you're not precise. He didn't use that terminology, but I remember Uncle Bob, Robert Martin, who's very well known for talking about developer productivity, professionalism, and process. He spoke here at Philly.net a few years ago.
Yes.
Full room that night. That was great. So hopefully that helps. But that's just me. I want to hear what you guys think. Or I don't know. I blabbed a lot about that.
But I think so. I'll be honest, I'm a few years out of the consulting side. I've been here with Microsoft for 3 years and actively being in that dev scrum role is been a few years out of it, if you will. I mean, we still code, we still do those kind of things, but I think some of those, those experiences you have, right now, because you're kind of in the mode where you are with your organization, right? And doing.
Today I'm not part of a scrum team.
Oh, okay.
But let's just say if I just rewind 10 years, in several roles, I've been part of a team. I wasn't the Scrum Master,
okay,
but a developer on the team, and we faced all of these things. The questions you heard me ask tonight were, "Wow, we really stunk at something,"
mm-hmm.
and what is your suggestion for the struggling team here?
Yeah. I think one of the things that, just going back to when we did start going through that Scrum process at different locations. It was, well, how do we get to that point where we know what level the team is at, right? We assign points to it. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that, you don't know the velocity of the team, right off? And oftentimes, well, how much should we pack into that first couple sets of scrums because we don't know how these guys are all going to work together or how this project's going to come together, and that was one of the things I think in places where we've launched into that, where things have kind of struggled a little bit of, we want to measure, we want to make sure we're doing right, we're doing this well, but how do we do that?
Yeah. I appreciated that he kept going back to data, the burn down chart,
yeah.
Having a graph to show when you might release or what you might ship. And I think I really never focused in on that axis before. You either choose how much you'll ship or when. I think I'll try to remember that.
Yeah.
That you pick one. You probably can't pick both.
It's like the project management chair, right?
Yeah, right. But now you need you really need a strong product owner here, and
an empowered Scrum Master is also helpful.
Yeah.
In a lot of these situations, they can't just be given the title. They have to be empowered to make the tough calls and be the not say the blocker, but the person who kind of shields the Scrum team from outside stuff when appropriate.
Yeah.
To let them focus, and then when appropriate, obviously, hey, we got a fire, we're gonna bring somebody out. But otherwise, let's run interference. Let's let them focus on doing the thing that they really want. One of the interesting things I took away tonight from his session was some of just it was woven in periodically, was just some of the other things that are important to remember while you're doing this. And one of them was when he was talking about Kanban, about how you had to limit what goes into your Kanban board because you have to focus, and the cost of multitasking and switching between multiple projects at the same time, and the time it takes mentally to switch those processes, and how multitasking too much can be inefficient. And I thought that was important, and we got talked about and then kind of moved on, but that's really important to remember those kinds of things, and that leads me to always talk about my favorite book, The Mythical Man Month.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
Which is it came out a long time ago, relatively speaking, and it is my all-time favorite software development book. I've read it, pretty sure I've read it more than once. I get on a soapbox and recommend it every few years, so I highly recommend that book if you are involved in any. I tell this, if you're involved in any step of the software process, right? This is not just a developer book. This is a if you're involved in testing, if you're a project manager, if you're a scrum master, whatever it is, this is just a really good book with a lot of real world, knowledge and fundamentals around that process. And it covers things like that. It covers things like what happens, and this is backed by real research and data from when the
1975.
When the author, I think I want to say he worked at IBM.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm reading this from the Wikipedia entry, but I mean, I've read it too. It's been a little while, but his experiences at IBM while managing the development of OS 360. So. And
one of the other good chapters in there, besides the chapter on the Mythical Man Month, there's multiple chapters in this book dedicated to different things. One of them was the cost of adding people, right? So, and a lot of times when you work in software, if something's behind, you put more people on the project to help get it done. But if those aren't parallel tasks, meaning if you add more people, you can get more done. If those are serial tasks, then adding more people doesn't add anything except more time. It doesn't buy you any more time. It actually takes longer than if you hadn't added them, because those people have to get spun up. So the people who are on the project also have to help spin up the new people. Yep. So you have to consider that when adding people. And there's a whole chapter on this where it goes, oh, look, if you have this many developers and then you want to add this many more, there's a nice chart that shows you at what point you've actually diminished returns. No matter how many more people you add, it will actually decrease from your ability to hit that goal due to the onboarding and the spin up and the getting ready and all that kind of stuff. And I found that chapter very interesting as well.
His famous quote is, adding manpower to a late software project makes it later.
Yeah.
And I've been in a room with other very smart people who all have read this essay from this book. And I know they've all read it. I'm positive they've all read it. And the question is, okay, so we wanted to be done in July, and you're saying we'll be done in September. If I get you 4 more people, can we make our date? And I've been incredulous, like just in that meeting going, I don't understand how we're having this conversation. I know everyone in this room is familiar with the central thesis of the book and the essays.
Yeah. And if you look in the chat, that quote that Kay just put in there is kind of indicative a little bit of where you were going, right?
9 pregnant women don't get you a child in a month, right?
Yes.
Which has been said in that same meeting.
Right.
Oh, meetings. This hasn't once. Many times in my career, and sometimes it was before I'd read this, and then after it was after, and I was going. And what's great about this is you read it, and he has a lot of real world examples, especially things like building the second system. And there's no silver bullet, which is his essay on how there's no one right way to solve every problem. And I go, okay, so we've all read this, and yet we continue to make the same mistakes, which is actually one of the themes of the book was managers continue to repeat these mistakes, so I'm going to write them down.
And we've read
1975, right? I mean, we're going on 50 years away from this. It's unfortunate, and it contributes to a lot of my personal cynicism. But it's true. That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's been a long time since I've thought about that book.
He wrote another book. He's not a one-hit wonder for books. I think strongly it's a design book, also worth reading. If you liked his first book and you wanted to read, he wrote a design book, also very good.
Well, he wrote that book so he worked for IBM. When he wrote that book, there's no doubt, and even when you read the book, it's clear. This was clearly waterfall development. Mm-hmm. I mean, he discusses things like that in the book about how the requirements are delivered to you and whatever. And now we all feel a little bit smarter that, like, well, obviously we don't want to work that way. But it's still the same problems.
Yeah.
Even though he wrote the book for a company and an era where there is no doubt in my mind that there was a waterfall process of the developers were delivered requirements by analysts and they were unflinching. And now you are to go out and build this software.
Right.
And here we are talking about how, well, with Agile, we're gonna have our requirements. We're gonna have a strong product owner who talks with the stakeholders and presents them the work along the way. But we're so much more enlightened because we know that the software that we probably want to build isn't what we think we want to build, and we'll discover that because we're continuously working with the stakeholders, and we still do the same things.
Well, to that point, they've done a lot of studies, which is why you choosing Agile isn't just because they think it's a more efficient manner. They've done a bunch of studies, and it's shown to be. I think, and don't quote me on this, I heard that it was 40% of the original requirements weren't needed once they got to production or something to that effect, and that's the advantage of Agile, which is if you continually iterate over the backlog, the requirements, once the client or the company sees what you've put out in sprint 1 and sprint 2, they refine or change what they want. So that way you continually are putting into production or into your, before you go to release, but into your sprints, the highest priority items that are going to be utilized. And then that way, because again, if they gave you all the requirements day one and you built it, the statistic was 40% of those wouldn't be needed by the end.
Yeah.
And so now you're trying to eliminate that, which makes you more effective, but more cost effective. So this is a savings to the company or the business or the management, whoever is paying for your effort. You're saving them money because you then aren't A, working on things that they ended up not needing, and B, you didn't then have to go do the things that they did want you to do next, right? So that it is a cost savings mechanism of delivering features in a product, and that is one of the reasons why you would consider going from waterfall to Agile.
And some of the things that are part of that loop, if you will, right? Should we roll this feature out, or should we do this feature and start to do some testing around, are our users interested in something like this? And having that instrumentation around your application be that extra bit of data around, what should go in the backlog or what should go in those feature sets.
So I brought up the what's known as the Manifesto for Agile Software Development.
That's Uncle Bob, is that?
It is. And so I guess I can make it full screen here on the laptop.
Let me find you.
So the reason I brought this up, I didn't ask this question. I came to the meetup tonight planning to ask this question. Because I found that we focused a lot on two popular, I'm going to call them implementations of Agile. That's me talking, not Scott. I'm not putting words in his mouth. But this whole thing came from, the fable is that these folks at the bottom of the screen got together at some cabin somewhere around a campfire or a fire and decided that these 4 principles would help build better software. And they're in the middle here. So
there we go.
They say, we are uncovering better ways of developing software and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value. So these are the 4. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And responding to change over following a plan. And when you look at the list down here, some of these is literally a who's who. Kent Beck, who is known for inventing extreme programming, which I think has led us to today the value of unit testing and code coverage, a good amount of code coverage there. Robert C. Martin, of course, better known as Uncle Bob. Who else do I see in this? Ward Cunningham. Martin Fowler wrote the book Patterns of Enterprise Architecture.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an important list.
Yeah.
So when I look at those 4 principles, I can map those to things Scott talked about tonight. Like if I look at customer collaboration, that's the idea of, since we're showing the customer the software a lot, that's better than the customer having ironclad negotiated the requirements in a contract, and then it turns out that's not really what the customer needed, because we're iterating with them if we're following Scrum. And that diagram we saw from Daniel Fu's site, okay, we're getting that point. We're responding to change because, as the customer tells us, you're close there, but you've got something that frobs a knob, but we really needed to hob a bob. Then you write a task out, remember to hob a bob, and the product owner says, boy, that goes, we're going to put that high. In fact, we're going to do it next sprint. That's responding to change, right? And then working software is the idea at the end of a sprint. And sprints is not in this list, by the way. That's a term. You don't have to have sprints, but working software, instead of documenting what you've done, what's better that the software works. It's not that you shouldn't do these things. That's why they have that statement at the end. And then individuals and interactions is the idea that the team working together That's why on the Scrum team, you've got devs and QA and business analysts there. You break those walls down instead of, well, let me send that back to analysis.
Right.
Let me send that over to QA. It's no, we should all be in the same, hopefully in the same room. Maybe not open floor plan for those of you that hate the open floor plan, but at least in the same room, working together a lot. You don't have to call a meeting to get together. Hopefully you're right there. And so I didn't get to ask him about this. I kind of wanted him to comment on, I was curious what his thoughts were on what do you value more, the Agile Manifesto or these processes? I tend to be here. I think this is the core, and if you get away from these 4 principles, then you, if for some reason the business takes Scrum or Kanban almost too literally that it becomes a process, then you sort of lose what you're really trying to do, which is quickly iterating on software to meet requirements that you both knew and then discover along the way with the stakeholder, the customer.
Yeah.
Customer is a fungible
Nebulous.
word.
Yeah.
But who's going to use this?
Right.
For real, for real. That's like done. That's mine. It's going to be customer. That's going to be my thing. I'm going to talk about the for real customer. You heard it here. That was me.
New podcast coming in 2019.
For
Chris
real, for real.
Gomez, for real, for real.
We're gonna call it
The Done podcast.
Yeah, well, people talk about done because
Definition of done is important, and he stressed that tonight, and came up in multiple questions, including my own. And
yeah,
that is a very important part of.
I've heard that term of like, is your team know when they're done? Okay, do they know when they're done? Like, you don't have to test it. It works. It's in production. And I say, so I've been on teams where our stakeholder, someone stands in for the stakeholder, and I immediately get very skeptical. I go, well, wait a second. So some business person who very well might be qualified, but I mean, if I'm writing software for to be used in a bank, I hope we talk to some bankers.
Right.
I want the for real banker. So that's just me.
And think about what goes into your definition of done. It's more than just, is it tested? Is it documented? Is it deployed in production? Is it monitored in production? Right?
Yeah, I love how you go back. I
always go back to
love
monitoring.
It. I love
it. Is it monitored in production?
I don't consider it enough, and I think I was talking with Rich beforehand that maybe one of these shows we will say, okay, folks, we're opening up, file new project, but before we do that, let's get it going in a system of our choice. Maybe it's Azure DevOps. Doesn't matter, right? Maybe it's GitHub. Okay, we've got our source control. Let's get our build pipeline. And it sounds to me like something else. And then for me, I threw in TLS. And then we got to throw this in too. We should be able to monitor it.
App Insights. We should
be able to write a line of code that throws an exception on day 1, build that sucker, get it out there, and when it blows up, we go, yep, there it is. Because that's the key to everything, right?
Right.
Well, we talked about that the last time we were here.
Yeah.
So we talked about App Insights and how you can leverage it even locally without actually hooking it into Azure. If you just run the SDK and the NuGet packages, we talked about how if you're just running it locally, but you are hooked into Azure to see it, it shows your stuff locally. It pushes it up to the cloud as well to aggregate it and monitor over time. So I mean, just having that hooked in from day 1 is super helpful, not just for the development process, but to the definition of done. Is it, when you're all done, is it monitored in production? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, we don't do that enough. What ends up in the logs is what helped the developer write the code.
Yeah.
Which is still
it's
totally
cool,
useful,
but it doesn't help ops. So if you have that kind of separation, I think that's why some organizations or some people advocate make the developers deal with the ops, right? Because
isn't that the foundation of DevOps?
Well,
when you
partially
bring those groups together, then
until it ends up becoming a team in an organization, and then then they get siloed in an office. But I'm not cynical about that or anything.
Not at all.
It's just more than developers and ops people. It's a fundamental change that an organization would have to take on and embrace with many benefits. But
yeah, we should ask Donovan Brown about that stuff.
Yeah.
We should have him on the Aftershow.
Oh, how cool would that be? We got to get him here to Malvern. So we got another great question that was, does a business owner accept when you're done? and then the second sentence was something that works really well gets added too quickly. I think probably commenting on both of what we're saying is that if your process works well, it's easy to incrementally add. I hope that's what you're saying. But the first question, who accepts when you're done? I think technically in Scrum the team does, at least with tasks. But the stakeholder, when you and again, I'm not going to try and tell you there's only one way to do Scrum, but there is going to be a presentation and retrospective, hopefully that stakeholders attend.
Yeah.
And who is stakeholders? Somebody who's going to be using your product, and they should tell you, "Wow, I have no use for that." And then you go, "Oh," and you work on your backlog.
Yeah.
Yeah, you work on the backlog, and you. But if the stakeholder says, "Yeah, wow, that is really going to help. That's wonderful." But I wonder, like, accepting that you're done, I still think that in traditional Scrum, he talked about self-managing teams.
Yeah.
I think in the end, it's supposed to be the team. Because there's the concept of, I don't know if I can find the comic, there's the concept of chickens and pigs. A story told, an Agile story that's told. In fact, I think it looks like I found something from scrum.org, but I don't know what's going to come up yet. So I was hoping it would be that comic. But long story short, in Agile, the idea is that everybody in the Agile team or the surrounding people are either chickens or pigs, right? A chicken just lays the egg to make breakfast. The pig gives a little bit more of its soul, right?
Right.
So which are you? The developers would be the pigs for sure, QA, testers, people who are giving their skin and their soul and their blood. And the chickens is somebody like a product owner or stakeholder who, don't get me wrong, the product owner may work long hours, but the stakeholder or the business owner, you know. Now, I've also made the argument that sometimes there are people involved in the process who are neither. And in fact, that's been me in certain cases where I've been asked to advise a team that is supposed to be doing Scrum, because what's happened is the world is not happy with the estimate.
Okay.
So they say, well, if expert comes and tells us where the team has overestimated, then the team thinks it's going to take 3 weeks to frob a knob, but should it really take them that long? And I'll be honest, I flat out refused. And the reason why is I said, this is totally unfair to the team. And the person who asked was familiar with the chicken and pigs thing. So I said, because I am neither. Right? I'm not on the team. I'm not responsible for the product. I'm not going to use the product. I'm not going to ship the product. And finally, I can tell you whatever I want, and then I get to walk away.
Yeah.
So there's no way I'm going to tell look, do I think the team's padding? They're probably scared. That's probably what it really is, right? Think about that.
Yeah.
They're scared. So what does that mean? Are they not trained well enough on what you're trying to do? And so they're padding in I know I'm going to have to run through the tutorial and read the brochure and try it a few times and Stack Overflow it. And so they're scared. And because I just said, I'm not either. I'm no stakeholder in this at all. So I got away with it, which surprised me, because you keep getting told by people like Uncle Bob said this, is be the professional, tell the business the truth. That's your job, right? And I did it, and they said okay, and I said, wow, he was right.
I guess taking that a step further, do you get to be that? Because your role is an architect, right, in your organization, or an expert of the tools that they're using, right?
Yeah. So without going into too much detail, I don't work in the architecture group.
Okay.
So my role is not to sign off on the team's architecture, or their choice of technologies, or how many people should be on the team, or how long it's going to take. Right? It's a clearinghouse for best practices and research and advising in the whole. So to give you an example, let's just say a team, it came to our attention, or we were asked about a team who said, they're really interested in having a vivid, interactive client experience on the web, and they're thinking about Silverlight. It would be appropriate for me in my role to say, Silverlight officially has 2 years of support left at Microsoft, number one. That's, to me, enough reason. Not a very long tail. You're going to be rewriting this app very quickly. Not to mention the fact that I don't know where you're going to find the developers, and you should probably, it just doesn't, I know it's supported, but
Not a good idea.
Another good example, something that, so Silverlight's the easy one. I think all of us here, that was the softball.
Right.
I'll give you something that's a little bit more. Anybody remember XBAPS? So XBAPS, when XAML and WPF were new, Microsoft hadn't quite gotten to WPF-E, which eventually became Silverlight, but you could see it was in the cards. And at the time, IE6 was dominant, just dominant. So I think Microsoft felt, we've kind of won the web. So if we make this awesome plugin for IE that renders WPF right in the browser, then WPF can be the language of the web. That'll be fantastic. And I don't think it wasn't a bad strategy, except for the fact that they were wrong, and the web was going to just be reborn in things like Firefox and stuff like that. So XBAPs were binaries that you built in WPF that ran right in the browser. Now here's the thing about XBAPs. They're owned by the WPF team. WPF is part of the .NET framework. The .NET framework has a 10-year life cycle attached to operating systems. So every time a new Windows 10 comes out, the current versions of the .NET framework that ship with that Windows 10 years. So what happened is someone at our organization came to me and said, well, what's wrong with XBAPs then? They're going to be supported until 2029. Because you don't want to do this. That's why, right? You don't want to be doing WPF in the browser. First of all, show me your WPF team that's gone through the heavy lifting of learning WPF.
Right.
And number two, you sneak a peek in that documentation, and Microsoft has quietly deprecated the Firefox plugin, the Chrome plugin. It only works in IE. It's never going to work in Edge. Oh, and by the way, IE's not really first-class citizen either. I mean, I know IE 11 is technically supported, right? Yep. Is that really what you want to do? So that's the role, is trying to give the advice of there's more than that.
Oh, sure.
More than that. But so it's interesting because it means it's the whole not being either a chicken or a pig dilemma, where you get asked for what should we do, but I try to be mindful of, I'm also not you. Mm-hmm. If I tell you to do the hard thing, that's not fair to you.
Right.
If I tell you to do something you've never done before that seems easy to me, that's not fair to you, because you have to live with it and you have to take the calls at 2 a.m. I'm not going to. I'm going to be answering some other questions.
Right.
So, I mean, that was my long-winded about me. But
sorry, I mean to put you on the spot like that.
No, it's fine, because people do a lot of different things, right? And I think it does lead really well into what a self-organizing agile team should be responsible for, and they should be responsible for those decisions. Mm-hmm. If you're starting a new project and someone's coming along and insisting to a self-organizing agile team that you use a technology and none of them are familiar with it, I think they have every right to push back and say, How would you expect us to do this in a timely manner? And first of all, get it right. Yeah. How many times do you do some new framework or technology? We kind of have to get it wrong before we really figure out how to use it.
Yeah, definitely.
So is that the risk the company wants to take? Because I don't like those kind of risks.
No, not for something like that. I mean, if you're the only person who knows or understands it, the pushback I always got was something like that. So, well, what happens when you leave?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. Or get hit by a bus, right?
Exactly. Well, yeah.
We like to say win the lottery.
That's the famous one. Oh, we don't say get hit by a bus anymore? Oh.
I like to say, what happens if you win the lottery?
That's what we used
try
to say.
to be positive about it.
That's what we used to say. It was a joke.
I'll still work here if I win. Really?
Oh, right. You see those? So when the Powerball numbers are big, that's when you say in the meetings, like, okay, are our choices here going to affect us when Rich hits the $820 million Powerball?
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's a good point. So yeah, that kind of leads into Scott talked a lot about a question was brought up about, as sprints pile up, it puts pressure on testing. And I think what kind of went unanswered or unsaid was he leaned on it. he said, you know, if you were to do one of these hardening sprints, then maybe that's a time for the developers, instead of just like calling it a pizza sprint, which may be a temptation to do, is what if you spend the time automating more of your testing and deployment, so that way the load is less on your manual test. Because to me, if you have testers, there's one of two things they could be doing, right? They could be writing more automation. That's a valid testing role, software development, engineering, test.
Right.
Or they could be clicking at the site to make something happen, good or bad. If they're doing the latter, then somebody who has the ability to automate needs to eliminate it. Like, that's your path to success. If I'm not sure that everything in the world is automatable, but man, automate as much as you can, right?
No, I thought that was a great suggestion, which was, you know, once you do get pilot, and you can't just sprint after sprint as a developer, as a team forever anyway, right? You need some sort of decompression at some point if you're putting in a bunch, and you know, a bunch of sprints pile up, and you know, developers need to decompress, developers want to do something else, and if you know, that would be, I thought it was a good suggestion, right? Do a quote hardening sprint where there's a lot of testing. And his suggestion was, you know, make the devs do some of the testing, or work on your own internal tools, right? Spend that sprint automating more of your tests, or automating your deployments, or working on your internal tools that ship, right? Or maybe if you're not using Azure DevOps, investigate that for part of that sprint. Or if you're not, you know, doing containers, look at containerizing it if that's something that you find that would bring value to it, right? It was a nice suggestion for a way to do something different during a sprint that adds value in the long run to your processes and to the team. Got more questions coming in, or?
No, I was just double checking. Because we have the cool setup there where I love the different scenes. And this is all rich, by the way, where we get to sit like we're in front of this cool looking studio, or we can bring the monitor up full screen. But even when we're not, you know, you can see a little bit of it there in the desk.
We can do stuff like this.
Yeah, which is something we've got to, and I think that's where we'll get to if we do some code. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of code on here.
You write, and then I'll just point to it.
There you
while
go.
you're doing it.
I have some horrible code on here that I use for Mixer because I'm trying to learn. We started talking about automating more of our work. So, you know, the first step was as well, let's start talking to a streaming platform. And so this is my Mixer client test bot, which is like me I'm trying to write a bot. But I don't have any goals. I just said, let me just do something. This is terrible. This has nothing to do with Agile. This is hacking.
This is founder project.
This is just hacking,
Let's
right?
add it to source control.
That's right. Ship it.
It should be, and actually, to be honest with you, it should be when I build here, it should be going out and getting deployed in a container, and then I could blast that container 50 times every time I hit build. That would be great. But the only purpose of this little app was on Mixer, we have a concept of sparks, which you earn just by watching streams. It's very similar to Twitch's bits, which I'll admit I'm not 100% sure if there's other ways to earn bits, but I think you pay for them. But you just earn these by watching streams, and then you can donate the sparks to partnered streamers, and if they reach certain milestones, they get paid. Well, so I'm in control of my own account, SpaceShot, but it turns out that for us to stream, we have some other accounts, like we have Philly.net and Philly Azure, and then I have my own bot that I call Hello Computer. And then sometimes we thought we were going to stream on Static Void Podcast, and sometimes when I get bored, I see a name that I like justgetcoding.com, and so I say, well, let me get the Twitter account and the Gmail account and the Mixer, just in case I go somewhere with this brand idea. And I said, well, I want to know, without having to log into all those accounts, what if I just want to know how many sparks they all have together? And so this little console app starts up the Mixer API. You can see it's doing a whole lot of awaiting on network calls. But it just basically, oh, and look, there's client secret, which I'll have to change right after the I'll have to change right after the stream, which is no big deal. Honestly, nobody's gonna hurt anything here.
Yeah, I sidetrack. One of the things that I'm including
waiting in my Stream Deck for doing these kind of things
Yeah.
is an opaque window.
Oh yeah.
So as it's seen, you basically just hit the button, it turns on the opaque window, and you don't see any of those.
Well, like I said, this is junk.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is literally junk code. And so, I can look at how much this streamer's earned and all the different accounts and get a quick, there's 3 million sparks that I could between Philly.net and all these different accounts that could be donated, right? I call it the strategic spark reserve. But what I'm thinking, and I don't necessarily think this is where useful for this stream, but the idea is okay, so junk project, instead of doing what I've done here, where it's trapped in a console app, and I literally have to go hit start for it to do one thing, probably from step one should be in some CI/CD, in source control, becoming a web app, TLS applied, and then even when I quit developing, I can just go hit the website on my mobile device.
Right.
Instead of like, oh, hold on, let me open up Visual. You saw what I had to do, the friction. Open up Visual Studio and hit play to get my one answer, instead of just heading toward production right away.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some value in that.
Website.
Well, that's what I mean, right? And it should be Azure Monitor. I think that's all true, because the more, there's value in just blasting out a console app to hack around, but the more time you spend in that state, the farther you are away from productionizing whatever it is you want to do, even for fun.
There's value in you having that in GitHub, either public or private, but there was value in you having that stored somewhere to either A, search yourself later, or include in a pipeline, right? Or have it be public and just so anybody else who wanted to, hey, I wanted to do the same thing. I had the same idea. I got a couple accounts. I'd like an easy way to know how to do it. And I found this GitHub project where I just put in the names of my accounts and hit the button and it tells me on the screen,
And speaking of GitHub, we should really talk about this at the top of one of these after shows. But I've got my GitHub account up. Brand new feature of GitHub. I know Azure Repos already sports this. Bitbucket already sports this, right? But here I am. I do not pay for GitHub. So here I am, a freeloader on GitHub. And I'm going to say, I'm just going to call it new repo. And I'm going to pick a private repo. New feature.
Up until last week, it was possible.
Yeah.
But you had to pay for it.
You paid for GitHub,
Yes.
right. You paid the $7 or whatnot. And now I believe, is it 3 private repos per account? Unless and they've always had this ability where if you were a nonprofit, as Philly.net is, that you kind of tell them.
Yeah.
I'm actually not sure what Bill had to do. And then they say, okay, and we got what is essentially a team account.
I have to check on the number. I know it's 3 people you can add who as contributors.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
I didn't think there was a limit on the number of private repos. I got to pull up the blog post and see.
Yeah. Yeah, it was big news.
So, and I will give one, personal example around that. It was actually fortunate in that I had a customer in here last week with a hackathon, and during that hackathon, we wanted somewhere to
there it is. Yeah.
put code and be able to share that code among the group, but they didn't want to have it in the public environment. And like, just yesterday, here comes this new feature. We can do this. Do you guys all have GitHub accounts?
Unlimited.
So
Yeah,
It's unlimited.
you were right. Unlimited repos.
Okay.
Unlimited repos, and you had it exactly right. Up to 3 collaborators for free.
Yeah, I knew the 3 part because we hit that as part of the
Right.
thing we were doing. But
That's cool. That the very next day.
I know.
Oh, by the way, we could go put this in GitHub. Yeah.
Sometimes things just align.
Yeah. As if you planned it that way.
Right. Oh yeah, I knew that was coming.
Sure. Well, I mean, you work for Microsoft. But, even with the GitHub acquisition, they're acting independently. And heck.
Yeah. But it's not. You think about kind of the 2 platforms we have for storing code, right? You have GitHub as the public repository. It's always been public, it's the open source side of things. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you this ability to make it private if you want to. Think of the other side of what we've done recently on the Azure DevOps, where Azure DevOps was always the private one. You had to bring people into those accounts and get them access to your projects and things like that. And then we enabled this public feature inside of there, so you can create a repo and make it public for people. So the lines of those things, merge a little, or blur a little bit, if you will, so that regardless of what you're comfortable with or what you wind up using, you got the ability to do both. And both are basically, Azure DevOps and GitHub. You can go out and you can create free accounts for those and get started.
I think that we could do a whole show on this question: how have you experienced company support for learning new technologies and testing it with existing systems? This is like a Static Void podcast show, right? Is it something that you're left to do on your own time, or something they allot time for? And I think a lot of us deal with, I mean, maybe not so at Microsoft, especially in a lot of both of your roles, which I'm totally putting words in both of your mouths. You're demonstrating for customers the best way to do things. So, heck, you have specific training events for these things. And no, I've spent a lot of my career at places where, well, you're a developer, right? It's just code. Mm-hmm. As if there's magic. I mean, heck, I can take 2 C# developers and one career, very, very, very experienced WinForms developer, and can whip out desktop apps. They'll be great at it. And then the company says, well, why can't that team just move it to the web? Just move it to the web. I remember I had this was years ago, a developer who was working on a WPF app for an enterprise. He's very good at what he did. Mm-hmm. Knew the business domain very well. Very good at WPF. And we were just in a meeting one day, and he said, the meeting was over, just sort of chatting, and he said, so have you ever done any web development? And this wasn't 2000, by the way. This was 2011.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I said, yeah, a little. And he said, how would you get started? And I kind of sussed out that what he meant was, look, I know WPF. I don't even know where you start. And I thought, oh my gosh, right? Like, I took this ride. I was fortunate enough to take the ride as it happened. Yeah. I was in college when the web came of age. And at the time when we were making GeoCities websites, so you could learn HTML, and then, this CSS thing came out. So I had the good fortune of like, a new technology. Okay, learn incrementally. Someone starting today kind of blew my mind to think, even an experienced developer said like, oh my gosh, where am I going to send you to start? So that, if a company, if your organization doesn't at least recognize that you need to learn, then it's not always the most fun place to be in that, even if you like to learn. Right. And learn on your own, which I think I do. And you do. You talked a lot about Azure Daily specifically being that hashtag is specifically for that purpose, your commitment to learning and consuming a lot of your time.
Yes. I would say I think learning is imperative if you're in IT. I would say for anything, right? Yeah. We'll say especially in the software industry, right? If you're not learning all the time, it's going to catch up eventually, and you're going to have to learn a lot to catch back up. Just like your example, that person would have a lot of things that they would have to know, and I would say, to answer the question, it varies by company, right? Some companies allow a ton of time for you to do, dev and test and R&D and learning your skills as a part of your job, and others give you less, and it just depends on where you work and how they function. My recommendation is that you bring it up with your managers or your company and suggest, putting in some time for that. It doesn't always have to be going to a conference or a 1-week training. That's historically what we've all done for a lot of different things. And it could just be, hey, do lunch and learns. Right? Yeah. Advocate to help do it yourself, to help the team bring it up. They want to see value in it. So you could always go, hey, I think it would be good if I or we learn something that is going to be valuable to our projects. So you could always frame it in that manner to say what you want to spend your time on, being, I think learning Angular is going to be important because we need to migrate our product there in the future, or we need to learn containers, or we need to learn DevOps, whatever it is that you want to learn or you think is valuable to the business, you can always bring that up. And then you can always figure out what are the options for that. And then, like I said, suggest training paths, be it going to LinkedIn Learning or Pluralsight, or my favorite, this is what I've always done in my career. So my advice for this is learn it yourself when you can. Either if you can learn on while you're at work, great. If you can't, learn it at night. Come in and do a lunch and learn. Yeah. Either way, whatever you're allowed, whatever you want to learn it, and come in and do a lunch and learn and show that value. I've been doing lunch and learns, I don't know, half a decade, just on things that I wanted to learn, and that can start a longer process. It can help build that culture. You can be the culture builder for your group, where you get that started and it gets rolling and people enjoy it, right? People want to help, they want to do their own, recruit people to do the lunch and learns with it. I've always started out, I would do one or two, and then, you see a couple of people who are on both of those, calls internally and go, hey, I noticed you're on those calls, something you want to do, and start out with things that are in people's wheelhouse, yep. Right? They don't have to go learn something new. Get the first one, be like, hey, you're really good at this. Do you want to do a lunch and learn so the rest of us can get better? And then they'll, then they kind of get into it, and then okay, good. Now you want to learn something new? Cool. Go learn whatever you want and come back and present. And for people out there that are starting to do that, this is going to help your career long term. Again, whether you do this all on your own time or you're able to do it at work to help your team, take that same process. And if it's something way out of left field that doesn't have to do with your job, but you want to learn it, great, go learn it, and come present at a user group.
Yep.
That's where you can turn around and do that. There's most likely a user group wherever you are located in the thing you want to either learn or you want to learn and present. That is happy to have you.
Oh, and they're looking for speakers.
And they're
I
looking
promise
for
you.
speakers.
No matter what.
Doesn't matter if you think you're the 1,000,000th person to learn this and do a presentation. Please do it. Come on out, present it at whatever group. They're always looking for people, and go from there. I mean, there's a lot of good career building opportunities for you to come do that. Network with that group of people, right? If you're not in that, if you want to make a career switch, go learn the thing that you want to do and go present and go to that user group, because that's where you want to be networking, right? This can just snowball into user groups and networking and a new job or a new career or presenting at conferences or whatever it might be, right? However you want to take your career, that is a great way to do it.
Yeah, and I think to that point, we brought it up in the meeting that we had earlier around being able to or being aware of things that are. If I switch this up, there we go. We have our upcoming meetings, right, that are coming up, and we look at the various events we have, and there's a whole bunch that were on there that were DVD, right? Yep. We need people to come out and speak at these yep. sessions. The other thing that is, if you're interested, we have Code Camp coming up, and I don't think we talked about the dates for that, but basically the 12th and 13th of April is the next one. We have a call for speakers that are out, and I think Bill said we've got one person who's signed up so far. So this is a perfect opportunity to come out and get in front of peers and be able to talk a little bit about something you're passionate about, talk a little bit about something that you want to know more about as well, right? This might be a thing for you to kind of get behind to get off and running and learn how to do something that you're interested in. So definitely recommend doing either one of those. So if you have an idea for a talk, let us know, ping us, or head out to Sessionize and sign up for the Philly.net camp.
Exactly. If you ever really want to learn something, teach it to somebody else.
Yep. See one, do one, teach one, right?
There it is.
So I think before we close, I wanted to talk about, there's a event here next week.
Yes.
And there's an AKA MS, there's a short link for it.
Short link, yep. So bring up so we want you to type it in as you do it. Hang on, you're on 4. All right, so if you do aka.ms/ it's Azure Dev Days Philly. So Azure Dev Days is a program that you might have seen around the US. It was in a number of different cities. We finally got that event to come through here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia MTC, where we do a lot of our user groups, and we actually record this session here. Is that loading for you? There you go. That looks good.
So Azure Dev Days Philly.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping, well, I think I can still grab the link, but in any case, so this is next week.
Yes, next Thursday.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go for it.
We lightly talked about streaming it on Philly.net.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is it that you need somebody?
We could. Someone would have to do it because I am giving some of the talks that are there and running, kind of doing the Bill Wolf side of this event.
And that's next Thursday.
Yeah.
So I'm working on getting here for it.
Okay.
But I don't have the answer tonight. But we would have it
by the next
tomorrow
Wednesday
or
show.
Friday, I hope.
Okay.
Because then at least we could get on Twitter and on our Philly.net Twitter and say, hey, some extra content, Azure Dev Days.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool to get it there. So, and besides, I kind of want to come to it. So I figure, hey, I can watch and participate and then make sure the camera's rolling.
Yeah, and if I recall right, I don't have they don't list an agenda on there, but I have seen the agenda for it. Basically, it's talking about Azure, DevOps, it's talking about app services, containers, serverless, and there's a half dozen different 1-hour sessions basically. And I think the last couple hours is a hands-on lab where you basically take one of those sessions that we talked about and run through a lab in the session there, and we'll be there to support you and be able to answer questions, get you unstuck, and those kind of things. So it's a great opportunity to get hands-on, and I'm pretty sure that lab content is publicly available. So if we live stream it, then even people who are remote can still be able to participate and take advantage of that.
Okay, now it says here as a prerequisite they would like attendees to have the Introduction to Azure course.
So
that's in Microsoft Learn. Okay.
Yeah. So what's great about this is that through our Learn platform, we've got a number of courses and things out there to get you started and to be able to get up and running on components in Azure and components in some of the other properties that we have as well. But Azure being the one that I certainly tend to focus on. And oftentimes, if you need some kind of a subscription or a virtual machine or something like that to make it run, usually those labs include the ability to do that without you having to bring your own, essentially. Yeah. So Learn gives you a little bit more than kind of what we would do typically in what we've done in the past in the hands-on labs.
Okay. Well, I'd like for us to get that content nailed down. So I was hoping to be able to say absolutely for sure, but
a good strong maybe is okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can get the time to come to it. Certainly.
Good with definitely maybe.
Definitely maybe. See if work will send me.
Yeah. Are you around, Tim?
So, huh?
Isn't that an Oasis album?
Yeah, sure.
It's a good album.
Tim, are you around?
Next Thursday.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
I know. Some of us have day jobs. It's okay.
Yeah. So next Wednesday, no Philly.net meetup, no meetup here in the Malvern office. However, I think we will be back here, at least me and you, Rich.
Yep.
And maybe we'll go ahead and get started with the hands-on that
Let's
we were
build
talking
something.
about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So next Wednesday on the Philly.net after show without a show.
After show without a net.
Philly.night or whatever we're gonna call this thing eventually.
I keep putting it in the Twitter or the YouTube title as Philly.night with the episode number at the end of it. So this was episode 4.
All right.
For those keeping track. There was an episode 2. I don't think it ever was released.
Yes, and so Kay Van Orden didn't point out that on the Azure Dev Days main site, Philly/Malvern is not listed, which I remember.
It is not.
Your frustration with that.
Yeah, so that was why I created the quick link and pretty much been pointing to that. I do have an email out to the owners to see if there's some way we can get that thrown on there quick. But the last official one that was up on Dev Days was, I think, as you mentioned, back in January. So
So there's a lot of that content too, and if we can get Philly.net affiliated folks to stream it, we will. But it is a volunteer effort, so if we can, it's awesome. But
that's why we do this. We like.
Sometimes we have to work too. So.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about the learning new things and the things we're passionate about. The reason we do this is because we like doing the live streaming stuff. So
it's a lot of fun. So I want to thank everyone who stuck around, especially K Van Orden / Skullcrusher for Life, who was a huge contributor on Twitch tonight, asking great questions to Scott, and then here tonight giving us things to talk about, which is more than half the battle.
Right.
So thank you very much, and just keep telling your friends if you're not watching this live, and hopefully you got something great out of it. But boy, I think we've gone on almost 90 minutes. So we always say, what are we going to talk about? And yet here we are.
We walked in the door saying that very same
what are we going to talk about? So that's always great. I'm glad, and it's always a lot of fun. So I want to thank Tim and Rich and Microsoft for this awesome, the ability to use the awesome space both for our meetings for Philly.net and using the studio, because I don't work for Microsoft. I think it's cool. I mean, what would I do without these lights and this green screen and this cool camera setup? So
and I'm gonna get myself a green screen. That's why the lights are back here.
Ah, yeah.
We're gonna. That's
cool.
in the works.
Oh,
So
very nice.
I gotta figure out new sets now to put us in. So this will be fun.
Well, it's great. So anyway, thanks for joining us, and you can find us all at our usual places on Twitter. We'll see you next Wednesday right here. The stream will be announced on YouTube and on Twitter, and as soon as we get a time nailed down, as we're still working on a regular schedule, and eventually this will be appointment viewing. So thank you all very much, and have a good night.
Night, guys.